Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. My guest is a returning guest, an alumnus, John Gillis from Adobe. So, John, for those who don't know, can you provide a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, so I'm over at Adobe. I've been here now going on about 3 years. I'm an automation engineer at Adobe now, which basically means that I get the pleasure of building fun tools for the SOC and trying to help their lives be a little bit easier and make things a little bit better for them. So.
Admirable. Admirable goal. All right. Well, it seems like a lot of the I've had different people on the podcast from Adobe, repeatedly over the years, and I don't know if this is like a normal thing for any company of the size of Adobe. Maybe, I think it probably is, but Adobe is my only sort of lens into the environment of how much stuff you guys create internally, as opposed to buying off the shelf, and just saying, hey, well, let's take this product and we'll plug it in. Adobe has a very we'll just build what we need kind of mentality, which is cool. So I'm having you on this time. I want to talk about, kind of how things have, continuing to evolve in the world of AI and such within Adobe, and specifically about dynamic detection analysis. So I guess let's start with, it sounds fancy, but let's start with just what is a general overview of dynamic detection analysis and why it matters.
Yeah. So part of the reasoning for calling it this is that through a security analyst job, they are required to pivot continuously throughout an investigation. And so when an analyst originally gets their detection, it's packaged with as much automation that we can put into it from the very beginning. We try to grab all the information we can about any IP addresses or domains or any hashes that come in. And everyone does that. And, it gets the analyst off in a good start. But that's just the beginning of the journey. Now the analyst has the challenge to continue down this path, and they have to be able to go down any side path or rabbit hole in order to be able to determine the end result. And so dynamic detection analysis, what it is in my vision, is giving the analyst a little tool that they can carry with them on that journey, that when new things pop up, they're able to then quickly identify and be able to chase that thing down whatever side path they need in a short amount of time, so that they can continue down the main path and get to the final results.
Okay. So, one of the things that I, as I was kind of doing a little background research on this and trying to understand what you're doing and what dynamic detection analysis is, I see the term a lot of, LLM agent. So let's talk about what does that mean? How are we using the term LLM agent? And then from what I could glean, it seems like, and this kind of going back to your admirable goal of making the lives of SOC analysts easier, it seems like it's a pretty significant leap in terms of the ability to leverage AI to kind of streamline and simplify cybersecurity tasks. So I guess let's start with LLM agent, and then talk about how it differs from other things that Adobe has going on, and how it helps kind of improve cybersecurity.
Yeah. So, and this is great because an agent, different people, it's a hot word right now, a buzzword that people are using in different ways. The way that we tackle the definition of an agent, what we're building, is a tool that if you can compare it to this, like has the brain of an LLM, but then has the tools and the knowledge that it can readily access. And so what does that mean? It means that the LLM is what's running the agent. And so that's how the analyst can interface with the LLM. But any LLM nowadays, we all know, can get things wrong, and they get things wrong a lot because they just don't have the information. So we introduced something called a RAG system, or retrieval augmented generation. Basically, what that is a fancy word for a chatbot with documentation. But we can enter this in as like a tool in the tool belt of the agent. So it has access to these documents and can call on the documents when it needs it. And then on the other hand, we also give it additional tools through functions that we can write in the code. And so when we say tool, really all that means, if you break it down to the very smallest thing, is it's just a function that the agent inputs information, that tool runs, and then it outputs information, and then the agent takes the information and then feeds it back to the analyst.
Okay. Yeah, and I realize there's a difference between talking about cybersecurity versus customer service, but part of the reason I asked the question is just, like you said, like we use agent to mean different things depending on the context of whether we're talking about a software agent that's running in the background and doing things, or we're talking about an agent as a human being trying to accomplish things.
Yeah, and in this world, it's kind of like both, in the sense where it's like taking both those kind of ideas and then putting into one.
Yeah. So one of the things that I seen mentioned as a potential challenge here, and also just, I mean, I think it's just an overall challenge for AI in general, and that's just like the potential for human analysts to have inherent biases, outdated processes. How does what you're doing help mitigate those kind of things?
Yeah. So the part that's the hardest for an analyst, it feels like, is you kind of get siloed into your own world where you're repeatedly looking at things, trying to find malicious activity. And a cybersecurity analyst over time develops like a jack of all trades kind of skill set, because they're being exposed to all these new things all the time. The problem that you run into is that human beings, like every security analyst, I would say the top 5% are the ones that are able to retain all that information, and they become like the cream of the crop, excellent analysts. But we can't expect that of all analysts, because that's years and years and years of experience that you have to go into there. But when you add something like this LLM agent that an analyst can carry with them, now you can do things like, I don't understand like all these ports that I see on a host that are open. It's going to take me about 5-20 minutes to go research all that and to thoroughly understand what that host might actually be doing. Whereas with an LLM agent, I can ask it, it can draw on resources that I provided, and then all of a sudden it can give me an explanation about all those ports and give a fairly good guess about what that host is doing just based on the ports. That doesn't necessarily give the analyst all the answers, but now what you've done is you've allotted the chance for the analyst to think, to see what it sees from the LLM agent, and then make decisions based off of that information plus additional information that the analyst has. And so those inherited biases, they're going to always be there, but what we can do now is we can start challenging those biases at a very rapid rate.
Okay. Well, I can think of some parallels. Like my wife and I talk frequently about how it's hard to find a good doctor. And a lot of times when you go to a doctor, or especially if you just go to like a corner urgent care or whatever, that they have these inherited biases, or and that inherent biases and outdated processes of they quickly jump to a conclusion because they're looking for expedience. They want you in and out of the office, and they're like, all right, well, Yana, your symptoms seem like a cold, or they seem like this, and so they're jumping to conclusions based on biased opinion they already have, as opposed to actually looking at the evidence in front of them. And I think the same thing happens with taking your car to the shop or whatever. Like, there are certain things that, like, and in defense of doctors and auto mechanics, there is an Occam's razor element to it of, okay, well, this set of symptoms 9 times out of 10 means this. So I'm going to save us all some time, and we're just going to jump to that conclusion and move on. But it's that 1 out of 10. And I think the way you described it, like, what's nice here is the ability of the AI to retain and quickly distill all of the information, as opposed to just remembering, all right, well, here's the top 5 things I usually see, so it's probably one of those.
Exactly. And I think, like, one of the things that we try to do when we have the LLM agent like challenge those ideas is you got to keep it small. Like, it has to pick out very specific things for the analyst to then get an explanation of, like, this is what the LLM's opinion, or, like, based off of your documentation, this is what it could be. Because, and that's kind of like the guiding principle when you're creating stuff like this is KIS is keep it simple, but I also think that stands for keep it small as well. And so if you try to take something like an issue that's too big and then try to deliver an answer based on this big answer that could be many different possibilities, you're more likely going to fall into something where the LLM is going to answer you wrong, or it's not going to make sense to the analyst. But if you focus on things that are very small and then derive answers from the small things, then it's a lot easier to see your biases, or like what you're glossing over, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too that I know I've addressed on the podcast, and I think I've addressed it on the podcast with engineers from Adobe, is the mixture of experts concept, and the idea of instead of having this like massive AI data set that's like a ChatGPT that's trying to use the entire internet as its data set, which half of the information that it's basing its information, its answers off of, could be wrong. That if you have like if you're a cardiothoracic surgeon and you say, okay, well, I have this data set that's specifically only about the thing that I do, and so you're going to get more precise answers. And I think if you have those, like smaller data sets that can be more focused and more the integrity and the veracity of the data can be, so what I'm looking for, like verified or whatever, like you know that information is correct. And then you say, okay, well, this LLM is very good at this topic. And then the challenge / question is having some sort of other interface that is a broader AI, where I ask the question, and then its job is to figure out, oh, okay, you're asking about Volvo engine mechanics, or you're asking about cardiothoracic surgery, or you're asking about how to bake a cake, and then finding the right AI to ask that question to.
Yeah, it's all about the perspectives, because that's what you're trying to generate, right? With those different expertise, is you're just trying to generate a perspective that can give you another vision to like tackle or challenge those biases that you have. And what's great about LLMs, or like these agents that you can create, it all, again, just boils down to a function. That's all it is in the end. And so you can create an instance of an LLM that is trained on that specific data that you're pulling, and then ask it simply for a different perspective. And that's where the value comes in for, I think, anyone, because what it's geared to do is just to get you to think, to look at it's like what we teach already. It's like you should try to look at it from different perspectives, kind of thing. But the LLM, or an instance of an LLM, can do that on like rapid fire almost, because you can generate any amount of perspectives that you want with different ideas, and then kind of like trigger fire at the analyst and say, well, did you consider this? Did you consider this? Did you consider this? And if the person knows that's working with the LLM that these are just perspectives that I should consider, a lot of power starts to come into that, because now I'm asking different questions. And there's a book, I think it's called Ingenious, I was reading the other day. And, its tagline is, ideas aren't cheap, they're free. And good ideas have a way of like surfacing to the top, while bad ideas have a way of funneling themselves out. And when you're giving ideas to the person that way, it just gets them to think. It gets them to see things in a way that they didn't see before. And that's where ingenuity comes in, and kind of like what separates us from AI right now, at least for the time being.
Okay. All right. Well, coming back to kind of the more security aspect of it and the dynamic detection analysis, one of the, and I actually just had this conversation with someone else this morning about how there's been this evolution over the time that I've been covering cybersecurity of tools and products being much more siloed, like, okay, this tool just does what it does, and this tool just does what it does, and then it being someone's job to try to put all that together. And over time, things have gotten much more integrated. So tools, even from competing vendors, tend to play nicely with each other. There are APIs, and I think businesses, customers, expect that. They expect that if I implement this tool in my environment, it has to be able to talk with these other things so that I can have like this, view of what's going on. So in this case, I would say that, things like, like where you have like, malicious, like threat intelligence type stuff, VirusTotal, Cisco Umbrella, Shodan, like those kind of things, I feel like, should be, integrated in there, like whatever. So like how is the LLM agent able to integrate with these tools? And and can you kind of like walk through like, well, how would that work if I was trying to do a specific task?
Yeah. So there's an underrated feature of OpenAI, and other LLMs now have this as well, and it's called function calling. And the way to explain it, or someone explained it to me, is it's the most expensive way possible to call a function. And basically what it means is you can have a query. So I want to do X, Y, and Z. And instead of the LLM responding to you immediately, what you do is you hand that query, and it's an API endpoint that you call, and the LLM then responds with a function name and then parameters. And so what that means is I can develop my own code, and I can give that explanation of what the function does to the LLM. And then the LLM just responds with, here's the function name and here are the parameters. And as a developer, what I do then is I just extract that name and extract those parameters, and I run the function. And then the response that I get back from my own code, I then put that back into the LLM, and then the LLM knows, okay, they asked this question, I responded with the parameters and the function name, and then this is what I got back from that function. And then the LLM can respond as if it actually ran the function itself, while the whole entire time it's your own code that you wrote. And so to answer like how you can integrate all of this, the integration is going to be extremely easy in the future, because again, it all boils down to a function. You're just writing something that has input and an output. And then in this case, we just give what's called a function schema. to the LLM, and then it can use your function as if it was, doing it itself.
Okay, interesting. One of the other things, and I feel like this is maybe unique, or maybe not unique, but this is more important in the kind of early stages of AI. Like there's so many questions about like its accuracy and hallucinations and such. So it seems like it's more important now, while we're kind of working it out and trying to figure out what's going on, to have some kind of transparency, some kind of something that I can look at to try to understand. Okay, how did it arrive at this conclusion? It's basically like a high school math class. Show me your work. And I think that, especially if I'm doing a security investigation, I think that would be very valuable, instead of just it spitting out an answer and me just going, I don't know, seems right. To be able to look and go, okay, wait, let me see, like, what exactly did you analyze, and how did you arrive at this conclusion? And and as an analyst, I wouldn't necessarily do that for every single thing. I mean, maybe right in the very beginning, but like, you should still be able to kind of periodically audit it and kind of like verify the integrity of the responses that it's getting. So, one of the things that I think you guys have built into yours is the ability of the LLM agent to kind of document the interactions and provide that kind of transparency. So, I guess talk about like, how does that feature work, and why do you think it's important? I mean, I just went on why I think it's important, but why do you think it's important?
Yeah. So, I mean, and to kind of dive into that a little bit, I talk with some of our incident responders and say, would this tool be useful for you? And their realistic first answer was, it wouldn't, because I'd be second guessing everything that it told me from the very start. Now, when you get to incident response level, now you have to question everything you're looking at. And his response was basically like, I would have to do all the research anyway, just to verify the hypothesis that the LLM gave me. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right in that we can't treat these things as black boxes as much as they are. And the way that we're able to get around that is you can start writing prompts that ask for evidence of how it came to conclusions like that. And so, for example, when it comes to documentation, the way that the system works is it will pull the documentation that it thinks is right to answer the question. And what we've done to kind of enhance that is, hey, will you quote the documentation that you've given me? And so then the answers that come back say, I think this, based off of this quote right here from the documentation that comes from X, Y, and Z location, this is my conclusion. This is my summary. And so then what happens is the analyst gets the actual thing that it's quoting, and it's a lot easier to determine if the LLM is coming to the wrong conclusions, because I can see the actual things that it's quoting. And the interesting part about this is I believe a quote from Sam Altman when he was questioned about GPT-5, in the sense that they're not trying to make the LLM have more information, but more they're trying to make it more logical and the ability to make better decisions based off of the amount of information that it does have. The indication that I got from that was, we're not trying to make an LLM that has every single book in the library memorized. We're trying to make something that is more AGI-like, that's trying to think and be able to come to better conclusions. And so what that means for us is that in our development of our AI bots or whatever we're developing, is that we need to be able to provide that information to it. And we need to craft our prompts so that it just gives us its reasoning. And it goes farther than just writing a prompt that says, hey, will you just describe how you came to this reasoning? Like, there are other ways to be descriptive with the prompts and with how you're gathering your information, so that you give all the tools to the LLM so it can get its final prompt and then be able to say, okay, here are my quotes, here's my reasoning, and I can actually cite my quotes or my resources correctly to the analyst.
What is very interesting about that to me is, as you're describing it, I'm like, yeah, this is the same. There are teachers I'll stick with a high school analogy. There are teachers who are teaching to the test, teaching facts. I can memorize this. I can memorize all the state capitals or whatever. But the real goal of effective teaching is to teach the student how to ask the right questions and how to go find the information. It's not a memorization exercise. It's a understanding the process of how would I go find an answer if I wanted to answer a question. And what you described was the exact same evolution of AI. Like the volume 1 is saying, all right, here's all the facts, just memorize them as fast as you can and give them back to me. But volume 2, as you described from Sam Altman, is kind of saying, well, no, what if we make the AI so that it understands better how to find the answer you want?
Yeah, exactly. And to be able to explain it back to you. And what's so fascinating about this, if you think of it at like a broad scale, is if we're able to provide the information, like we have the data, and then we can throw that into an LLM or an agent bot like this, and then it can accurately describe back to us with evidence. That's where we're going. I mean, it already does that pretty well, but I mean, in that same interview, Sam Altman called GPT-4 pretty dumb. I mean, in the next 5 years, what is that going to look like? That's the big question that keeps on coming up. So how do we start building tools now to kind of bet that it's going to get better? And that's thing that's always on the forefront of my mind when I'm designing these things is these things are only going to get better, significantly better each year. And so, our answers that we're getting right now, the effectiveness that we're getting right now may not be at the point that I want it, but it will be there. Like we're going to get there. And then all the discussion of like, well, how does that change how analysts work? How do we think when we're doing analyst work? Are we thinking correctly when we're looking at these bits of evidence and pulling them together? What's the better way to start thinking about this?
Yeah. Yeah, like I say, going, from a school perspective, like with my own kids, as they were doing school, you have teachers who were like, absolutely. But you have like lockdown browser tests where it's like, you can't have anything. We're going to have a camera on. We're going to make sure you don't have any notes, etc. And then there's, the teachers who are like, just do an open book. And I always tend to, I favor the open book because I'm like, it's not a real world example to say that you should have everything memorized. Like in the real world, no matter what you're doing for your career, pretty much, you do have access to go find the answers. You don't have to know everything off the top of your head. And I realize it's a slight digression from what we're talking about, but it is, it's like, I guess what's interesting about that is as this evolves, it becomes less the way I described ChatGPT last year, because someone was asking me about, all the crazy things it can do. And I was like, well, in its current state, it doesn't do anything that crazy. It only has access to the same information you do. It's just doing a better job of Googling and coming up with an answer faster. Like that's it. Like you asked it a query, you could have just as easily put that query into Google instead of ChatGPT. You would have gotten the answer eventually. It's just a little bit faster at it. But as it evolves, eventually we get to a point where it's more like, and I always use this as my like aspirational pinnacle of AI, but Iron Man's Jarvis. Like you have an AI that doesn't just respond to queries, but is like can think beyond the query and can kind of predict like know on some level, okay, this is what you're probably going to ask next. So let me just, I'll suggest it to you. Hey, have you thought about doing this? And it becomes more of a two-way interaction instead of just a glorified search engine.
Yeah, and I think you're when you talked about the test, something that's interesting about that, kind of like bringing that into perspective too, is that the LLMs that are being designed now have a limitation. You have a prompt limitation. You can only do so many words within one prompt for the LLM to analyze. But we're getting up to 1 million token prompt sizes. And you think about that, and if I'm doing my math correct, I believe that's about 750,000 words that you're putting into one prompt. And that's a lot of pages. That's a big book. I mean, we're talking full, like the majority of, I don't know, Harry Potter books at this point with 1 million token sizes. If not, I'm probably off on the math on that. But now when you think like, if I'm going to test an LLM on something, your resource for how much information it can hold, if that's structured information that it can see, I mean, it's getting pretty incredible to think about what is what we can achieve with that. And the only thing that kind of hangs us back right now is cost. Like, do you get the ROI to be able to feed that much information, and then how much you have to end up paying for that?
Yeah. So when you brought up Harry Potter, I looked it up. The total word count for Dune is 181,493 words.
Okay, yeah.
So with 750,000 words, I could put the original Dune trilogy.
Yeah, exactly.
into the prompt and just be like, hey, analyze this and let me know what's going on.
It's a lot of information. And what's so exciting about this is we're going to really start expanding like the questions that we can start asking, because 3 years ago, I don't think many people were saying, like, if I had all of the Dune trilogy in my mind at one point and then could ask questions based on that, what kind of responses would you be getting? And I mean, you switch out Dune trilogy for, the past, I don't know, all the MITRE framework within one prompt, which you could probably fit in there. And now you can start getting a lot more information about what's happening or what your questions that you have. But I think it's going to really start to have a paradigm shift on people very soon. I mean, it hasn't hit yet, but I think in the next year or two, people will have that paradigm shift of what is actually possible.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that I've drawn the parallel in past podcasts of it to me is like the advent of Google, where it's like, we had search engines, but it wasn't like that big a thing. But then Google hit, and all of a sudden you have businesses and schools saying, well, no, that's cheating. Don't do that. But you give it a couple of years and it goes from, oh, that's cheating to, oh, no, we expect you to do that. If you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. And I feel like that's where we're at with AI. Like you have schools that were like, well, don't do that. You're cheating. Don't use ChatGPT. That's cheating. But it will evolve. 2 years from now, 3 years from now, schools will just expect that you're going to use some sort of generative AI LLM model to get your answers, and it just changes. It changes the way you do education, because it changes like your expectations. It's like, well, if I'm asking you to memorize all 50 state capitals, my bar is here. But if I'm asking you questions about state capitals and I'm expecting you to go get those answers from ChatGPT, I can be much more specific about what I'm asking, or more detailed. Like, it's not just memorizing city names. So yeah, I mean, I think there will definitely be an evolution there. But one of the other things, and this is definitely off topic from dynamic detection analysis, but in talking about the tokens, I'm wondering, and you may not know, but I'm wondering if you know the answer. Is this a workaround? So you remember when Twitter was a thing, and you had the character limitation, but the workaround for that was I could go write a document and then post it as an image on Twitter. So even back when they had the 140 character limit or whatever, it's like, okay, but I can go write a 500 character message, save it as a screenshot, post it as an image, and therefore I can work around your limitation. In a similar vein, I feel like you go on ChatGPT, and if you're using 3.5 or whatever, I don't know what the current limit is, but it's not super long. You can't go posting like whole, lengthy documents in the query. Well, actually, I use 4 so much that I'm not even sure what 3.5 does. But like in 4, like I can attach a file.
16K.
But I was just like, can you attach a file in 3.5? I don't think you can.
No, it's not.
But in 4, I can attach a file, and I'm just wondering, does that get me around the token limitation? Like, is it, I have this many words in my query, but now I'm also saying, okay, but also go look at this 50-page PDF file.
Yeah. So underneath what's happening right there is that I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong on this, but what they're using code interpreter to extract the text out of the document and then process it in your prompt.
All right.
And so
you think it probably still counts against the token max?
I think it does. Yeah. Tokens are hard to get around because it's kind of like the way I see it is it's kind of like how you're charged for your electricity in your house. Like it measures everything that it's coming out of it, and you pay for every single measure of electricity that comes out of your house. And so if there was a way to get around it within your house, like metaphorically speaking, maybe there's a way to get around it with an LLM, but because it's designed from the ground up to do that, it's a good question. I don't know of a way that I would use to get around it, or if there is a way.
Okay. All right. Well, let's bring this back. One of the other things I wanted to that I had kind of heard about, was the idea of the Sherlock service and kind of being able to access documentation in real time. So, like, I guess, talk to me about the Sherlock service, how that integrates with the LLM agent, and what that does for an analyst.
Yeah, Sherlock is an awesome project that a really talented team put together in Adobe, and they're actually making it open source. And it isn't ready yet for them to upload their first pulls for that in GitHub. But what Sherlock does is it automates the process in creating a RAG application, this retrieval augmented generation, right? Just to make a chatbot with documents. And so basically it boils down to the ability to upload documents. And then we have the ability to talk with those documents with an LLM. And so they've put it together where it speeds up that process significantly and allows us to manage those documents a lot better, to be able to chat with them and kind of customize the prompts that pull out the right information and everything.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that is it. Anytime I can take an instruction manual and turn that into something that I can interact with using natural language would be helpful. So we talked a lot about what you're doing specifically with this LLM agent and dynamic detection analysis, and broader AI questions. I guess let me ask you kind of the $60,000 question of. There's obviously a lot of potential. Like there's so many ways that AI can simplify things, streamline things, make things easier. But from a cybersecurity perspective, just kind of like, how do you see the future of AI, LLM agents like this? And what would you say are the risks or challenges we need to kind of like be on the lookout for?
Yeah. So the future generative AI LLMs within cybersecurity and everything is pretty significant. The impact that we can have on the industry to make companies safer as these LLMs develop. Again, like you said, is there's a lot of potential there. And where the potential comes in that I think people don't realize and what they're not seeing is they come up with an amazing idea. They're like, hey, LLM can solve like this very like large pain point that we have. But what they're missing is that when you're developing solutions like this, is that you need to start small. Starting off with what I said in the very beginning, it's KIS, keep it simple, keep it small. Because yes, you can solve that problem. There is a way to do it. But where generative AI and LLM messes up is when you give it too big of a pain point or a problem to solve. The true effectiveness that comes in with generative AI is when you give it something small. And then you say, solve this problem for me. Then when you can solve that problem reliably and it's consistent, that's when you move on to the next thing. And you do another small pain point and you fix it. And you slowly build yourself up. So I was at a conference 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, a press cybersecurity conference in Park City for AI and cybersecurity. And I got in a really good conversation with a gentleman that does reverse engineering. And it kind of came up, malware reverse engineering. And he came up, he's like, well, I'm not really sure how AI could help me in this. And I said, okay, let's take it from the very beginning. What's the first thing you do when you get a binary? Okay, well, I do static analysis. I start pulling out the imports. I start seeing, what are the different things inside of the binary? And then I usually end up throwing it into Ghidra as well, which is helps with static analysis. And I said, okay, why don't we pull this into Ghidra and let's pull out one function. And we pull out one function that's in assembly code. Basically, it's ugly as can be, but we threw it into a prompt and we said, explain this to me. And all of a sudden, it was able to pull out things that gentleman, he's like, I knew that was there, but I missed this or I didn't see this. And so there's an example of a very small thing for a larger perspective, because reverse engineering includes a lot of steps that go into there. But if we can just take the one thing that's useful, automate that with LLMs, and then we build on top of that, you're going to look back after, 10 days, 20 days, maybe a month or two after building this, and all of a sudden you're going to have a huge problem that's solved very effectively with AI.
It's funny that when you talk about the assembly code and finding, it reminded me of, 5 years ago, I didn't use subtitles watching streaming services that much or whatever, and my hearing's fine. I don't need the subtitles most of the time, except for like a lot of times the dialogue, the clarity of the dialogue just sucks. So you turn on the subtitles, and so I use subtitles a lot of the time the same way I use my GPS getting around town. Like, I know how to get from point A to point B, but I'll put it in the GPS anyway, just so that in case there's some traffic that I don't know about, it wants me to go around, I can, I have that awareness. But what I've noticed with subtitles sometimes is, like, someone will walk into a room and the subtitle will say something about, here's someone whisper this phrase or whatever. And I'm like, okay, if you were just listening, there's no way you would hear that actually. Like, I've actually questioned it when I see it on the subtitles. I'm like, yeah, you're full of it. No one said that. But it's like, it's just so subtle. And it's like, I mean, honestly, I've gone back and analyzed it, go, okay, yeah, that is there. And then thought, obviously it can't be too important. Otherwise they would have made it so you could actually hear it. Like, I'm not even sure what the value is of putting it in the subtitle, but it was similar to me when you were talking about that, of when you have those subtitles on, you learn that there are sounds and things going on that you wouldn't know about if you didn't have the subtitles on.
Exactly. And it's those, and maybe that whisper wasn't important to the movie, but maybe like 3 or 4 whispers down the road, all of a sudden, like, maybe the individual whisper wasn't as important, but when you get the small things and they build up, then it becomes something that actually is important to the story. Or in the case of like when you're doing technical work, it's the small things that are literally the most important thing that you should be paying attention to. And we miss them all the time.
I know you said earlier that, in talking with incident responders, that they'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to trust that, which is probably perfectly valid, I think, at this point. And even if you fast forward 5 years and we have a more established foundation of AI technology and we have more trust in it, I feel like hopefully there will always be some degree of skepticism. Hopefully there will always be someone's job to like periodically audit those results. We don't want to get so comfortable that we just start going, okay, well, I trust it now. That's how you get Skynet.
Yeah.
So, but with that in mind, so I know what the incident responders think, but as you've deployed this, I was curious if you have any success stories or interesting findings. I mean, you just described like the reverse engineering thing, but just basically how within Adobe or whatever, how have analysts responded to using the tool?
Yeah. So the small tools that we've because again, that's what I focus on. I focus on the small things and kind of like build up on that. So the small ones that we've handed out to the team have resulted pretty positively. So there's a bit of automation where we automatically take a command line and then we have GPT analyze that command line. And with the prompt that we've written and everything, it explains it in a way that allows the analyst to have that perspective, like just a different perspective of what's happening. That one has had a lot of success and saves analysts a lot of time. Because again, in the world where we don't know everything, and Adobe is massive, and so we see different tools and different things that we've never even heard of being used. And so we get quick insights with that. Some of the other things that we've got quick wins with are we combined our documentation for a certain service that we have, and the analyst in natural language can ask a question, and then it will build a search query for the analyst so that it isn't 100% right, but what it does do is it gets you about 80 to 90% of the way there. And then the analyst just can copy and paste. And sometimes these can be massive search queries. They can copy and paste that in there and then just tweak a couple of things and then get to their answer a lot faster.
One of the things, and I want to say it was like a year ago or so, but I had a conversation. I don't remember if it was Adobe, might have been someone else, but they were talking about creating basically somehow using AI to say, okay, well, here's our best security analyst, or here's our best salesperson, and then say, okay, well, let's go monitor them closely, figure out what do they say, what do they do, what questions do they ask, how do they think, and build something that does that as a way to try to like multiply them and make other people better. If I say, okay, well, because a lot of I've never been one, but my understanding would be that a lot of what goes into being a good SOC analyst is starting by knowing the right questions to ask. Because you have all this data, tons of data, but you have to know what you're trying to get out of the data. And if you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right result. So I feel like an LLM can help a lot in that respect, just to be like, well, all right, at least let me take you past step one by giving you the right questions to ask.
Yeah. And it's when you think of an LLM agent, right, bringing it back to this idea that everything's just a function in the end. If you have that prize like salesperson or that prize SOC analyst, really the approach is very much the same, which is, okay, what's the documentation that person is thinking about when they go to this? And then how do I connect an LLM to that situation? Or, they use a specific tool. Well, how can we integrate that tool into the LLM so they can just use that? And again, if you focus on that very small piece and you just nail it on the small piece and build on that, there's no reason why you couldn't have a replica of that person in some way, shape, or form to be able to help the other analysts. The big thing on this is it's not about the AI taking over the person's job. It's about giving the person the AI tool or the agent so that they can work in conjunction to be able to get to the end result faster and better.
Well, so anyone who listens to, what the 7 people who regularly listen to this podcast, no, okay, will have heard this 100 times by now. But I end up repeating it on almost every podcast at this point. But I was at a conference last year and I heard someone say, it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's someone who knows how to use AI who's going to take your job. And I'm like, and I do that, man, that just really resonated with me, because I'm like, yeah, it's not that like AI, both in its current form and even down the road for a lot of jobs, it's like, it's not designed, it's not equipped to take your job in most cases, but it is equipped to significantly augment your ability to do your job if you know how to use it right. And just like there is a significant difference in the ability to leverage Google. Like, some people just know that Google is a thing, and occasionally they go type something. Like, the syntax of the query is important, and there is an art form to learning how to get the results out of Google that you want. And and especially as they change things, and the first 4 pages are ads. But there is a difference. Like, it's not enough to just say, I have 5 people, they all Googled the answer. It's like, okay, well, you could still have 5 different answers depending on the skill level of the person doing the Googling. And that's also true with AI. Like, prompt engineering is a thing, like understanding how to interact with the LLM in a way that extracts the results you're looking for is going to be a valuable skill.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's the next generation of tool that you gotta jump on, figure out, and if you do, you're going to be in a good spot.
Yeah. All right. Well, so as we wind down, I got two final things for you. One was, I wanted to ask, everyone right now everyone's doing a generative AI something, even individuals. I don't know if you know if you know Richard Steenan. He's a security analyst, formerly with Gartner, but he's got his own analyst firm now, and he's written a number of books. He made his own, like, within OpenAI, he made his own GPT that is trained on his books. Yeah. So you can go query that GPT, and essentially you'll get an answer that should roughly equate to what Richard Steenan would tell you if you were talking to him personally, because though it's only trained on what he thinks and what he said. But anyway, everyone is doing some kind of generative AI model at this point. So for organizations who are trying to do something similar to what you're doing, I'm curious if you have any like basic guidance, pitfalls to avoid, and the other part is just kind of, is there anything, you've got what you've got now, what's on the horizon? Like what do you do next with it?
Yeah. So my suggestion would be this: start small, start very small. Don't try to overreach things. The future of LLMs are going to build in such that we can do bigger things in the future. But if you start small and like nail the pain point or the problem that you're experiencing with LM, starting on a small thing and building on top of it, that's where your success is ultimately going to come from. A lot of people are creating awesome things with generative AI, and they try to reach for the stars. It's just not a reliable way of doing it. And so when you start small and kind of like fix that niche, and again, it all comes down to it's just a function. If you can create the function with the LLM that works, you're going to start off really well. And so in the future, like where this is going to go and like where I see things that I'm excited about is the expansive nature of the prompts that are happening. I'm really excited about NVIDIA's new announcements with their services that they're going to be providing for computing and for LLMs. I think what we're going to be seeing in the future is that the LLMs will become significantly better at logic. I think that they will become significantly faster. And so you'll be able to get answers immediately instead of waiting 30 to 40 seconds. I think that will come down to probably under 5 seconds really soon. And yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I mean, it was a great conversation. I know I like to kind of go off into the weeds here and there, but it's all interesting stuff. And most of my conversations revolve around the use of generative AI and LLMs from a cybersecurity perspective. But even just on a broader scale, it's kind of mind blowing to think about what's next. And the thing is, I'm humble enough to recognize that I've got no clue. Like if you had asked me in 2005, if you had come to me and said, "Hey, what if I make a messaging service where like I limit the messages to 140 characters?" I'd have been like, "That's stupid. Who wants that?" So sometimes it takes someone doing something that seems stupid at face value, but then it turns out to be a big thing until some other person comes along to ruin it.
Yeah. And I mean, really, the future that all of this is going towards is what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink and the implications there when we start playing with the idea of brain-machine interface devices. And so that's another conversation.
That gets us eventually to the Borg. I mean,
yeah,
because on the one hand, I can definitely see like, hey, it'd be great if like my brain was I just had like a gigabit connection to the internet from my brain. And then all I have to do is think of the query and my brain just knows the answers because it can just instantly Google everything. Like, yeah, that's great. Except for that I do that with 1 million people and all their brains are connected. And it's like, well, now I've just got a Borg collective.
Yeah, that's exactly like the future is going to be wild. Like the next 5 to 10 years, Star Trek was just kind of like an introduction into what our future may hold, kind of in that area. And yeah, it's true. It's this idea of like, how does the world change if you're able to process, let's just say that Congress passes a 500-page bill. How does the world change when every single person can now understand that bill, like on a very significant level instantly?
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, like we talked about earlier, there are steps along the way to that. Like, even now, so if you asked me 2 years ago, I'd say, yeah, I have no idea. I would maybe read the executive summary and get like what are the top 3 bullets about what is this bill about. Now, I can take the 500-page bill and I can put it into ChatGPT and say, hey, summarize this for me and give me the key takeaways. And I'm going to get a more comprehensive answer than I would have 2 years ago. It's still not the same thing as being able to say, okay, instantly, I understand it. I've read and understand what was going on in this, but it's definitely an improvement because it's a very good example because you hear about that all the time about someone creating some 1,800-page bill that they just shared today and they're going to vote on it tomorrow morning. It's like no one's reading that. No, it's not even possible.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like, how are you going to vote on it? But anyway, no, it's a good example. And yeah, well, I guess we'll have to have you back on in a couple of years. We can go over our notes and talk about how things have changed.
Maybe we'll all be wearing Neuralinks at that point, and so the podcast will be very different.
Well, as long as it's connected with Mr. Musk, you can count me out. I will be the Luddite. I'll be the Luddite who is not connected. So,
fair enough.
All right. I'll talk to you later, man. Thanks.
Thank you.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.